Hello and welcome to the Roundoids podcast. My name is Tim Richards, and in stark contrast to my last episode, where I mentioned that Bayern are absolutely incredible, they're an unbeatable club and we're going to win everything, we are actually in fact now staring down the barrel of relegation. So while obviously that's not entirely true, it's very clear that a week is a very long time in football and so much can happen in a shorter period. So if we just look at the last three games against Bayer Leverkusen, Aston Villa and Eintracht Frankfurt, it's very clear that there's still quite a long way to go for this team and for Vincent Kompany. So last time when I said that Bayern were playing in a promising way, it wasn't exactly inaccurate. So I want to offer a take on this, on the last three games that isn't simply, Leverkusen, Villa, Frankfurt, they were just parking the bus and they were just hoping for a counter. Because while that is somewhat the case, there's a lot more to it than that. So let's look at the Leverkusen game first. When I watched the game, I was really surprised to see them playing for a draw, like within the first 10 minutes. There was a lot of time wasting, and I actually thought that the referee was going to be very much on top of it. I saw after about 8 minutes, there was a moment for a Leverkusen goal kick that the referee was going to say, look, I'm aware of what you're doing. You need to not do this. It turns out the referee was absolutely useless, but whatever, we move. But yeah, it was very obvious from quite early on that it was going to be a difficult game for Bayern because, Leverkusen did such a great job of keeping compact. They didn't let anything go through. But, at the same time, so did Bayern. But the difference here, though, is that Bayern looked really secure defensively, but they still seem to look really threatening going forward. So you can look at the match flow on something like SofaScore, and it's all Bayern, bar a couple of small blips for Leverkusen. So their goal really was against the run of play. So as a whole, I'm going to be biased here, but I don't think it's unfair to say that they didn't really deserve a point. So I was disappointed when it ended 1-1 because I thought Bayern really should have got the winner. They should have got the winner a few times, actually. Serge Gnabry had a couple of chances. Michael Olise had a great shot that was saved. So when it ended 1-1, I was let down in the way that it feels like when Bayern lose. But then you let it sit for a little bit, and then it becomes a bit clearer that while this was generally a good performance, it highlighted a few issues that Bayern are going to have to contend with this whole season. Namely, how do you face a team that plays with such a low block? So Pavlovic's goal from distance, great goal. I think it won goal of the month, actually. That was actually only one of 3 shots on target for the entire game that Bayern had. Meanwhile, Leverkusen had 3 shots, 2 of them were on target, 1 of them was a goal. So you can pluck stats out of everything and you can get them to tell a story, but fundamentally there is a conversation here around efficiency of shooting. So to be British for a second, in cricket, there's this concept called economy rate, and it's how many runs a bowler concedes for every 6 balls, every over. I feel there's a similar idea that can be used to look at football teams. So if we look at Bayern's economy rate as shots on target from shots in total, against Leverkusen they were about 17%. So meanwhile, Leverkusen was 66%. So that's 3 from 18 versus 2 from 3. So it's a different sample size, but it kind of highlights just how wasteful Bayern can be sometimes, certainly how wasteful they were against Leverkusen. We can deep dive this for hours, but the long and short of it is that Bayern had more opportunities to win this game than Leverkusen did, and they didn't take them. Defensively though, very secure. Kim was incredibly dominant in the air. Upamecano did a good job alongside him. I thought Alphonso Davies played really well. I think Davies, I would say, probably has a shout to be Bayern's player of the month, considering how he's been doing recently. But overall, it was a draw, and Leverkusen are probably happiest with that. But with that being said, there were still positives. So as a whole, it kind of reminded me of the match against Gladbach in Nagelsmann's second season. It was quite early on in the season. So Gladbach scored with their first real effort on goal, and then the rest of the game, it was just Bayern trying but struggling to break through. I actually remember Nagelsmann put Matthijs de Ligt on as striker for the last 5 minutes, as there wasn't really any alternative for him. And that kind of rings true for Kompany here. Bayern attacked comfortably and looked to control the game, but in terms of alternatives, there wasn't really much to work with. And then the Aston Villa game came along, and it's largely the same story. Again, if you look at the momentum of this game, it's virtually all Bayern against a team that had a very solid defensive structure and looked to get a breakaway. But therein kind of lies a bit of a paradox here. Were Aston Villa parking the bus, or were Bayern pushing them back without making a worthwhile effort on goal? Maybe it's both. Villa aren't really a defensive team, so pinning them back as Bayern did is actually somewhat of a compliment. I don't think you can watch this and say this was negative football because Bayern had opportunities to score, they just didn't execute them well enough. So Emi Martinez, I absolutely cannot stand the guy, but it's not like he's a bad keeper. Beating him isn't easy, but before you do that, Bayern couldn't get anything past Pau Torres or Diego Carlos. In my mind, this Villa team was beatable. I don't think there's necessarily any shame in losing to this team. I think Unai Emery's clearly a fantastic manager, and they've got some really fantastic players. So to talk about them as if they're just relegation fodder, like, oh, we couldn't even beat Villa, it's a bit disingenuous. But I do think this team was beatable. Bayern had 70% possession, 17 shots in total, 7 of which were on target. So if we use the economy rate again, that's 41%. That's certainly better than against Leverkusen. But Villa capitalised when they could. They've got a really dynamic forward in John Duran, and he is evidently a big game player and a difference maker. And that's the sort of player that I feel is lacking for Bayern. In terms of players who can make the difference and shift the game like Duran did, their options are quite sparse. Michael Olise, Jamal Musiala, these are great players. Like, they're dynamic, they're unpredictable, they're hugely valuable assets to the team. But outside of them, the attack really looks to struggle against low blocks. So in my opinion, this simply was not a match for Kingsley Coman. So if we're being harsh, he's looked ineffective in every game that he's featured in this season. A lot can be said about Coman, but with him on the pitch, there was never any sense of threat. So one thing that you can give Gnabry credit for in the Leverkusen game and in the Villa game is that he was always in the right places. So Serge Gnabry, he's always been a high volume player. He's very wasteful, but eventually scores. He's at least got the intelligence and the attacking knowledge to be in the right place. So his last effort against Martinez, maybe another keeper gets beaten, but he at least got there. So the last games, in particular, if we look at how effective Michael Olise can be, it's really shown Kingsley Coman's limitations as a forward. So if you want to win a game against a team who are crowded in their box, can you expect Kingsley Coman to be a difference maker in the same way that you can expect Olise or Musiala to be? The answer is no. So given that Bayern have played 3 consecutive games against teams who have played with a low block, this is going to be a problem, and one that Kompany needs to find a way around. The third match that Bayern failed to win came against Frankfurt at the weekend. 3 goals for, 3 goals against. And again, it's the same story of a very dominant Bayern getting caught out. So let's look at the economy rate here. Bayern took 24 shots, 13 were on target, so that's 54%, which is getting better. Frankfurt had 6 shots, 4 were on target, so 66%, it's the same as Leverkusen. But more than that though, 50% of their shots were goals. Like, that's wild. A lot of the blame can be put on Neuer for not making the saves that he perhaps would have made a couple of years ago. Like, it's very sad to see him declining like this, but again, there are larger issues at play here. So Neuer doesn't make the saves. Okay, that's not great, but that isn't why the match wasn't won. So 24 shots, 74% possession. This match was all Bayern. Frankfurt didn't look weak. They looked really bad at times. They couldn't hold on to the ball. They were getting pressed really easily. They were pinned back for most of the game, but again, Bayern couldn't make a dent. The 3 times they were able to get away, they scored. I don't want to get too into the numbers or anything like too data heavy, because while it's good to be able to quantify certain things, stats don't always tell you the full picture. There's a quote from a guy called Rory Sutherland that's generally statistics are either compiled by someone trying to make themselves look good or else by those hoping to make someone else look bad. So let's just move away from the stats and instead focus on a couple of facts. Bayern look good. They look dangerous going forward. The players look comfortable. They look happy. They look at ease like they've been working with Kompany for years. That alone is very impressive. In the Bundesliga, they are one of 2 teams who are unbeaten. They've got a great goal difference, and the players who are being written off are starting to come good again, namely Alphonso Davies, but that's kind of a whole other discussion. There are limitations that this team has. There are a lot of injuries, but with the international break now here, that kind of gives players a chance to relax and recover. But there is still work to do. I think Kompany's doing excellently, and many of the players are too, but there are a lot of issues here that need to be ironed out, and I think one of the first steps is addressing which players he can rely on to be difference makers when no one else can do it. So now absolutely isn't the time to start calling for Kompany's resignation, because he is, outside of a couple of details, doing a far better job than I think many fans had expected. But this squad is far from perfect. It needs at least one more world-class attacker. Now, is that player Florian Wirtz? Yeah, it is. But in the meantime, Bayern need to make do with the players that they have, or at least look to bring in someone later on in the season. Maybe that's Iran Kunda, maybe that's someone outside of the club, I don't know. But regarding a transfer for Wirtz in the summer, or anyone else in the winter, they need to begin offloading players. So I've long believed that the best time to plant a tree was 200 years ago, and the second best time is in the January transfer window when a decent offer comes in. So that's pretty much all I have to say at this point. It's just a very quick one. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of positivity. There's a lot of things to be excited about. But at the same time, I don't think it's lost on anyone at the club, certainly not lost on Vincent Kompany, that things aren't exactly perfect. I think to say that this is a crisis, I think is a bit ridiculous. I think even Muller said, if this is a crisis I'm very happy to be a part of. I think losing one game out of however many it's been, only losing one game under Vincent Kompany is objectively a very positive thing. I think that it's going to be something that once it starts to tick, I think it's going to be really positive and is going to result in more wins, more goals, and ideally a couple of trophies, maybe. I don't know. I don't want to be too greedy, but ideally this ends positively this season. But that's all the time that I've got for this week. Do I want to commit to doing it next week? No, I don't. It's the international break. Maybe I'll do one. I've got a couple of ideas of episodes that I want to talk about, not so much about like match reviews, but rather looking at bigger, more specific topics. With that being said, if you've got any suggestions, any requests of things that you want me to talk about, any ideas you want to hear my incredibly worthless opinions on, by all means let me know. But until then, follow me on Twitter. I'm active on the Bayern subreddit. So yeah, get in touch and have a great day, and I will see you all next time.